G'day everyone, Dicko here with another kick-ass walkthrough. Jumping right into part 3, we are going to start rigging this goddamn robot. So for those who haven't seen the first two videos, I go through the process of modeling the robot. I talk a little bit about constraints so we can actually get an understanding of what we're going to do in the future. And now we're going to apply those skills to this rig right here. And of course, if you like what you see here, feel free to give a like, subscribe, and get notified to see more. So let's jump right in, shall we? All right, so what we see here is our model from the previous videos. I've organized everything into their appropriate groups. So we talked about that in the previous video as well. So we've got a main group for the whole robot, geo_robot. We got a group for the wheels, a group for the arms in the left, group for the arms in the right. We've got the antenna, and then we've got the body and the frame. All right, so that's just what we need for this rig to work. But we don't want to be clicking on these by accident all the time. So it may be worth adding these to a layer in the display layers tab. So what we're going to do is select the entire robot, go to the root node of this group here, and just go to select all by type. Not all by type, just go down and select hierarchy. Select the whole thing, and then go to this little button here that says add, create a new layer and add the selected objects. So I'm just gonna go ahead and click on that. We're gonna set that to R for reference, so that means that we won't accidentally select the mesh. We're gonna rename that as Geo Robot or Robot Geo, because Maya doesn't like it when you repeat the name across the outliner and the layer stack for some reason, so just push save. You can give it a color as well. I'm going to give it yellow. Same thing with this. I've actually added a ground plane basically to have the robot sit on and all these lights and stuff. So I'm going to actually add all these extra bits and bobs to their own little layer stack as well. Call that environment. And give that another color. And I'm just going to hide those away. You can actually hide them away by pushing this little button here for visibility. Just get rid of those. And now we have a nice clean environment to work with, which makes it really easy to see everything that we're doing. All right, cool. So the first thing we need to do to get started is to figure out the control scheme for our robot. So logically, what we need is a few things. We need a global control to be able to place the robot wherever we want at the start of an animation. We need a controller that will allow us to tilt the whole thing from the bottom of our robot, so basically pivot on that wheel. And then we need a controller that can control the wheel on an individual basis, so it could spin independently of the robot. And then we need a controller that allows us to select the body and then pivot from our axle of the wheel. Yep. And then further up the hierarchy, we need a controller that can control the body individually. So from the frame of the body, so we can actually, sort of rotate the body from there if we want to. And of course, we need controllers for the arms and the antenna. And finally, we need a control for the eye. So when you think about the logical purpose of every section and how you would move them around, it gives you a basis for building out your controls. So we're going to go ahead and build out these controls. And we're going to do very simple ones using control curves. And they're all going to be the same shape, so it's going to be really easy to set up. So let's go ahead and get that started right now. All right, so we're going to go to our little curves and surfaces tab here. We're going to make a circle, and that's our first control. Very simple. We can make it a little bit larger if we want to, so maybe that big, for instance, because we're going to add a second control in the middle of that for the pivot of the entire robot. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate that by pushing Control D, and we're going to scale that down to sort of sit around the wheel. All right. So now we need a controller for both the wheel in the middle of the wheel to rotate that wheel, and the hinge or the the axle of our robot. So again, we're going to duplicate this control and we're going to move this up a little bit. And to make life easier, we're actually going to select our control. Then we can probably go to the wheel of the geometry of the wheel. Yep, there it is there. Control select it from the outliner. If you have this still referenced, you won't be able to select it in the viewports, but you can select it in the outliner. And we're going to go to modify, match transforms, and match translation. And that will put the control that we're going to build dead center to that axle. I'm going to go ahead and scale that down a little bit because I want the axle, I want it to be obvious that it's not going to be rotating in every direction. It's just going to be rotating in this direction. So this direction. All right. So there we got that control there. We're going to duplicate that one more time and we're going to scale it up again because that's going to be the control for the robot. All right, cool. Let's move on. So now we need to make a controller for the body. Now the body controller, again, can either be a duplicate of this control or a duplicate of this control. I'm going to go with the bottom one, copy that or duplicate that, and then scale it up to sort of fit around that body there. Like so. Awesome. And that's our body control. Going into the antenna now, we need to create 3 antenna controls, or 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the antenna. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that once more. Move that up like so. I'm going to scale that down to sort of sit around that antenna more comfortably, like that. And then I'm going to match the transforms of that as well. All right, so we have a little problem though. If we want to match the transforms of this controller to these antenna pieces, notice how the pivot points are all in the middle of our antennas. We want the control to control the antenna from the base of this area. So what we're going to have to do is eyeball it. So we're just going to go down into front view. So just tab into front view. And we're just going to go straight into the view of our antenna. Push F to focus on that area. And we're just going to bring that control right down to the base of that area there. Duplicate that, move it up a little bit, eyeball it again, like so. Duplicate that once more, eyeball that, and finally duplicate that once more. And we got ourselves our antenna controls. Cool. All right, let's get out of the front view now and go back to perspective view. And we're going to go ahead and create our arm control. So again, we're going to duplicate this control here, move it up a little bit, and we're just going to rotate this. So if we just rotate this on Z, we're just going to rotate this on the Z axis, minus 90 degrees. Doesn't really matter which way you go about it, as long as it's straight. And we're going to go ahead and bring that into line with our arm. Now we have an issue here, of course, is that the arm, again, if we look at the arm controls or the arm pieces themselves, our pivot point's right in the middle of that arm there. So we can still use this to our advantage, however. We're going to click on this control here, then click on the upper arm, and then we're going to go ahead and match those transforms under the translation, just to get the center of our control nice and accurate. Then we're going to go to the front view, and then eyeball that so it sits around. Oops, shit. Just select the controller and bring that into place like so. We're going to scale that down like so. And we got ourselves our perfectly aligned controller. So right down at the center of that area there. I'm going to duplicate that now one more time. And now we have our forearm controller ready to roll. Now, of course, we could go ahead and eyeball this side, but to make life easier, just going to duplicate this. And on the translate X, just set it to negative values. So we have the exact same negative value there. Duplicate that. Go to translate X. Negative value. And now we have our controls for almost the entire body ready to roll. So now if we go to perspective view, you can see that we have everything kind of set up. The only thing left to do is the eye. Now the eye is a little bit different because it's got to if we turn on the texture preview, you can see that if we try to rotate, let's open up the eye now. Where are we? Body group, eye, eyeball. We want to be able to rotate from the center of this controller. But if we go ahead and duplicate one of our controls, and then we're going to match the transform of this, and then rotate that controller to sort of sit around the eye, we have a problem in that we can barely even see the controller through the mesh. All right, so what we need to do, firstly, I'm going to go ahead and rotate that in X and get it nice and straight. But what we're going to need to do to sort of make this easier to click, we need to sort of edit the shape so it sits forward without the pivot point changing. So we can do this in two ways. The simpler way to do this would probably be to just grab the controller and then push D on the keyboard and then move the pivot backwards like so. Push D again, and then to make sure this is perfectly aligned, we're going to go ahead and grab the eye again. So with this selected, then the eye again. We're going to go ahead and match the translation once more. And now we have a control that will be pivoting perfectly around that eye socket, which is just what we want. Go ahead and save that file. All right, so the next thing we need to do is obviously go ahead and rename all of these different areas appropriately. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and rename them. So this one will be called global. Then we're going to have wheel. I'm going to call this wheel base, I think. Wheel base. Moving up the chain here. This controller here in the middle, I'm going to call that wheel. And this one here will be wheel frame. This one here will be body. And then antenna 1. Now, if you want to keep on writing these down like so, you can actually do multiple. We can actually automatically number these things by clicking the first one here, pasting the same name in there, and it'll automatically rename down the chain if we have to. And then we got 4 going down there. All right, cool. For the arm, that's going to be called arm. Let's go upper arm. L. Forearm underscore L. Same thing on this side. Upper arm underscore R. Forearm underscore R. And finally, we have the eye control. Eye. Cool. Again, save away. And then let's get these prefixes up and running. So we want to tell the animator that all these controls here are controls. So I'm going to give it the prefix control. So I'm going to go ahead and select all these. Go to modify, prefix hierarchy names, and then type in control underscore and push OK. And that will automatically rename all of those. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is set up the hierarchy for these controls to function properly. So basically, in the same logic that we talked about before, we're going to go one by one down the chain of parent-child relationships to sort of figure out all of these, how all these controls will work together. So starting with the wheelbase, it's going to be a child of the global control, because right now, nothing is influencing anything else. We're not going to use constraints for these, but we are going to do a very simple hierarchy to figure out the logic here. So, starting with the global control, we're going to grab the wheel and the wheel base, and then we're going to go ahead and middle mouse button drag those controls into the global control. And as you can see, now the global control will control the children of the ones that we've put in there. All right, cool. So the wheelbase here, we want to control basically everything going up the body. So we're going to grab the wheel frame, the body, and chuck that into the wheel base. All right, so if we grab the wheelbase now and rotate that, it's going to be controlling the other controls. Now the wheel frame, from here, we want to control the upper body as well. So what we're going to do is grab the body control and put that in the wheel frame control. All right, makes sense? Hopefully it does. So as you can see here, wheelbase pivots from the bottom, wheel frame pivots from the wheel itself, and now everything else will be a child of the body. But first, let's set up some basic relationships for the antenna. So we want the top of the antenna to be a child of the different segments of the antenna going downwards. So grab antenna 4, that goes into antenna 3 goes into antenna 2, antenna 2 goes into antenna 1, and then antenna 1 becomes a child of the body. All right, so let's do a little test. Wheelbase will move the entire body itself. Wheel frame will pivot from the wheel. The body will pivot from the base of the body. And then of course the antennas, if we select all of these ones here, going down the chain, they're all being affected as well. Cool. Same thing with the eye. The eye will just be a child of the body because that's just going to be following the body. The forearms now have to be a children of their respective forearms or upper arms, sorry. And then these two upper arms will be a child of the body as well. So now if we test this all out and check out the hierarchy here, we have our wheelbase controlling the entire body. We have the wheel frame controlling the pivot around the wheel and influencing the rest of the body. All right, let's move down the body. Now the body is controlling everything else. So as you'd expect, it should be controlling everything as you'd expect. So there's the body rotating the rest of the figure. We got the antennas doing their thing. And then we got the eyes as a child of the body, upper arm, child of the body, upper arm, child of the body. And that's exactly what we need. Now, the only problem, of course, is that all of these hierarchies still have transforms on them. So as you can see here, we still have scale attributes that are non-uniform on certain controllers. And what that's leading to is these really strange skewing effects across the characters, which is not what we want. So what we need to do is freeze the transforms on all of those in terms of scale. So let's go ahead and do that now. We're just going to select the very top of this hierarchy here, right click and go freeze all, or in this case, freeze scale only. And what that does, it will freeze the transforms on all the scale attributes across our hierarchy here. So now if I go to rotate this control here, we're not getting that skewing anymore. All right, we need to do the same thing with the controls on the translations though. So let's go ahead and do that on an individual basis going backwards. So we're just going to go ahead and fix up the transforms across all of those areas there. Okay, so we still have the same problem with the translations as well. So all of our controls still have some translation attributes and some rotation attributes here and there as well. So what we need to do is go ahead, grab the entire hierarchy here, and then right click, freeze, translate, freeze, rotation. And what that will do is make sure that all the rotation attributes are cleaned out and all the translation attributes are cleaned out as well, because that will become really, really important when we go to constrain all of our controls to our geometry, which is what we're about to do any second now. But there we go. We have everything up and running. I think that's about right. Everything is working to a T at this point. So now let's go ahead and start to work out our constraints. Okay, so our first constraint is to get the entire body to be controlled, relatively speaking, to this control here. Now, we already have this control that can inform the entire rig. So whatever we do to this control will inform this control, which will then affect the constraints of the geometry. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with this control here, the wheel base, and go to the geometry robot group as a whole. And then we're going to constrain it with a parent constraint. So we're just going to go ahead and go constrain, parent. And I think in this case, we will go with maintain offset turned on. Let's go ahead and apply that. And let's see what happens here. So now we got our main control here that can still do its thing. It's still controlling everything there. But if we go ahead and move this now, it's moving the robot with it. And it's also moving the rotation of the robot there as well with that global control. Even though this is the one is not the control that's moving the geometry with the constraint, it's this one here, which means that if we go ahead and select that control and move it around, it's doing its thing, both in rotation and in translation. Now, the only thing it doesn't have at the moment is scale. So what we're going to need to do is add a scale constraint as well. So we're going to grab this control here. We're going to grab the Geo Robot group as well. And then we're going to go ahead and constrain with a scale constraint. And in this case, it doesn't really matter whether we have maintain offset on or off, because the pivot point on the control and the group of geometry is exactly the same. So we're just going to push add. And then let's see how this works out. So we're going to go ahead and try scaling this up. That's working great. Let's try and rotate this now. Doing its thing. Perfect. Let's try rotating it. Yep, that's going well. And if we try translating that, it's doing its thing too. Now to test it with the global control as well, we're going to go ahead and select the global control, scale that up, and that's working just as we expect. We're going to try rotating that now. That's rotating just as we expect. And if we translate that now, that's working just as we expect as well. Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and do the wheel control now. So we only want the wheel group to be affected by the control that we're going to create now. So that's this one here. The Geo wheel group is going to be only controlled by the wheel itself. So what we're going to do is go to the control wheel, control select the wheel group, and then in this case we're just going to create a rotation constraint or an orient constraint. And we're going to actually, we can't do an orient constraint because we have one issue here. So the reason we can't do an orient constraint is because our pivot point for the control is at the center here, but the pivot point for our group is at the bottom here. So if we were to do that, just as an example, and try and control that wheel, it's going to pivot from its individual origin, which is not what we want. So what we're going to do instead is create a parent constraint. So we go ahead and go to constraint, parent, and you can have, in this case, it's going to be maintain offsets turned on and push add. And if we go ahead and control that wheel now, it's going to control from the center of that area. That being said, the wheel can actually fly off if we want to as well. It actually can work individually, but we will lock that off and hide it away so we don't actually accidentally do that in the future. But suffice it to say, the wheel is working as you'd expect. It's still moving with the rig. Oh, it's not moving with the rig. The reason why it's not moving with the rig is quite simple actually. And that's because it's the wheel base, the wheel itself needs to still be a child of the wheel base. All right. So what we're going to do is make this control here a child of the wheelbase. Just push P on the keyboard to do that. So now the wheelbase will still work with a pivot and still move like so, but the wheel itself will rotate individually still. All right, let's continue on. So we have this control doing its thing. So now we have to do this control here for the upper body. So let's go ahead and grab this control here. We're gonna grab, in this case, it will be the body and frame. So what we need to do actually is create a new subgroup underneath all of these controls here to be able to make this work. So what we're gonna do is select these different groups here, and we're going to group those together, Control G. And we're going to call that Geo. Oops, too far actually. My bad. Ignoring the wheel, we're going to do an upper body group. So we're going to call this group. Actually, we don't even need to do that. We just have to grab the yeah, we just have to grab these groups here first and then chuck them into the body and frame group. So we're going to go ahead and select these groups here. The arm, the antenna, and the, well, both arms, and just chuck them into the body and frame group. That will be a lot better now. That's what we need. So now what we can do is grab the wheelbase or the wheel frame control, grab the body and frame group, and we're going to add a parent constraint. Cool. Let's see how this works. So let's grab that wheel frame, and we can always rename it if you find it confusing. And we can try rotating it, and now that robot is moving more than we need to actually, but it's doing exactly what we need. So moving up the chain now, we're going to grab the body control now, move into our subgroups here, and we need to make the body group be driven by that control. So what we're going to do is grab this control, grab this body group, and again, we're just going to stick with the parent constraint for now. Go ahead and do that. And if we control this body now, you can see now we have complete control over that upper body. Now the arms and the antennas aren't moving at the moment, but that's only because these geometries aren't actually children of the body group, but we'll deal with that in a moment. And it's also not very necessary at this point, because what we're going to have is constraints from these controls driving the arms, and then what you'll see is that it's basically going to emulate the same hierarchy from the control group. So you'll see what I mean when it comes together. So starting with the eye, we're going to grab the eye control. We're going to go into our body group now and select the Geo Eye group. Do the same thing in this case. Notice how the pivot point for the eye group is all the way down there. We have our pivot working well there, but our eye group is in a weird, really strange position here. So in the case of getting this to work, we don't actually need the whole group here. We just need the eye itself, the geometry of the eye ball. There it is there. Not sure why the actual pivot point is down there in this weird position, but we can always fix that up by grabbing the move tool, pushing D on the keyboard, and then just sort of snapping it using grid snap to the middle there. And that will fix that up and be a bit more uniform with the rest of the rig. But I digress. Let's move on to the eye control. Grab the eye ball geometry directly this time and go to constrain, parent, and let's have a look now. Let's test this out. So the eye will now, well, should rotate independent to the body. So the body will still control the eye, or the whole body, and then we can still control the eye individually, which is just what we need. Perfect. All right, so for the arms, what we're going to do is essentially the same thing. We're going to create some parent constraints along the arms, and you'll see why we don't have to worry about creating subgroups for all of these different pieces of geometry. All right, let's go. Let's grab the arm control for our left arm. We're gonna just collapse this for now and go with our left arm geometry. Going to go directly to the geometry in this case. We're gonna go with our upper arm to upper arm. We're going to constrain with a parent constraint. And then we're gonna go with our forearm to our forearm, constraint, parent constraint. And you'll see what I mean now. Let's try and rotate this thing now. And now the arms are magically moving with the rest of the body. And that's because of our hierarchy within the control groups themselves. So the control groups have the proper hierarchy, and then we have constraints that are controlling the arms. So they essentially are emulating the hierarchy of the control groups. Let's go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Grab the upper arm R, open up the arm R geometry group, and do the same constraints. Parent. Oops, I did the wrong one. So upper arm R is working well, that's correct. And now forearm to forearm R. That's what we need. Oops, wrong one. Parent constraint, there we go. Great, so now the little limbs are working well. There we go, hello. This limb's working well, hello. This limb's working well. And we're almost finished with the rig. So now all that's left is the antenna. So let's collapse down these arm rig controls for now. And we're gonna work our way through the antenna. So starting with antenna 1. Let's start with the first antenna. Antenna 1, let's open up the antenna group. Antenna 1 to antenna 1, constrain, parent. Antenna 2 to antenna 2, constrain, parent. Antenna 3 to antenna 3, constrain, parent. Antenna 4 to antenna 4, in this case antenna top, constrain, and parent. And now what we have is a fully fledged rig. So we can scale it up. We can translate it from the base wherever we want to. Let's turn off that snapping. We can rotate it. And then moving up the chain, we can have a pivot now in the wheel here, which is just what we want. We can rotate the robot in different directions. That's great. And we can even, in this case, I don't think we could scale it. Let's have a look. I don't remember doing a scale. We can scale it. I forgot we did a scale constraint on that. That's great. We have our fulcrum control. So that's working the upper body. And we need to lock up a few things for that one. We have our wheel control, which is just what we need. Upper body control, so we can rotate that body and pivot it across that little, I guess you can almost call it the waist of the robot. We have an eye control, and it's controlling the eye in every direction, which is perfect. And then we have our antenna control. If we select the entire hierarchy here and try bending it, it's going to bend like a little noodle. Just what we need. Upper arm is going to be translating or rotating along the chain, which is just what we want. And you can see it's working like magic. Now notice how certain aspects don't work though. So scaling won't work because we didn't add a scale constraint. So we need to actually lock away and hide away features that we know that are going to break the rig, because we didn't want them to be scaled. We only want to be able to scale it from here, from the base. So we need to lock up certain attributes across the rig now to make it more functional and prevent it from being broken. All right, so the simple thing to do now is just to go through and lock and hide certain features. So we know that this one can scale. It can't scale, but it can translate. Technically it can, but we don't want it to. All we really wanted to be able to do with this thing is rotate it along Z. So what we're going to do is select, click and drag, select the scale X, Y, Z, lock and hide, and do the same thing up here, lock and hide. So now the only control that we care about right now that works is Z. That's the only one we want to be able to keyframe. So That's great. Same thing with the wheel here. We only want to rotate the wheel in these directions. So again, in rotate Z. So we're going to go ahead and lock and hide those attributes except for rotate Z. Perfect. This one's fine. We can actually rotate, scale, do whatever we want to do with this part. I think it's good to have that flexibility. So I'm going to keep that as is. All right, that's fine in my opinion. All right, this one here, I don't want to translate and I don't want to scale, because scaling breaks the rig and translating just puts the body off everywhere. So we don't want to have that. So we're going to go ahead and lock and hide those, lock and hide those. And then for the rest of these, we don't want scale and we don't need translation. We just want to have rotation across all of these, and that's all. All right, so we actually select all of these now, the entire hierarchy there. And then we're going to go ahead and lock and hide the scale. And then lock and hide the translation. So now, the only attributes that any of these controls should have is just rotation. That way, we can't possibly break the rig by moving things off their joints. So now that's all working just as we want to. So now if we double check everything, we have rotation in the major control, the global control, translation everywhere, that's great. We have scale, that's working to a T, perfect. Same thing in this control, that's doing the same thing. This one here doing the same thing. And of course, this is going to work as well. Rotation only in Z in this case. So that's perfect. We don't want to break anything else. That's perfect. Rotation in the wheel. That's independent from the body. That's perfect. We got rotation across the body here, which is just what we want. We got rotation here. Great. Great. And great. All these are working just as we want. All right, so that's exactly what we need for this rig overall. I think I'm pretty happy with the way it's set up. So the only thing we need to do now is just give it a bit of color so it's easier to see what the hell we're doing. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some colors to these controllers. So let's go ahead and select the controllers. And if we go to our attribute editor and go to object display, open up drawing overrides, select enable overrides, and that will allow you to change it to any one of these colors here. So I'm going to make the base green. I might make this one at the bottom yellow. Oh, let's go up one more. There we go. There we are. I can make the wheel red and just use whatever you think is best. So in my case, I like to work kind of logically, I guess you can say. So basically, these controls along the center line, I'm going to make yellow. The left and rights of the arms, I'm going to make blue and red. And then up here, I might make them green or something else. We'll see what happens. Anyway, let's just go through and create our colors. And you'll notice that as you do this, things look a lot cleaner, a lot easier to understand, a lot easier to sort of discern. Especially when you have different colors in the viewport of, like, you don't want to have a red controller over a red robot, for instance. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about there. Let's go ahead and enable the overrides. I'm going to make this side blue. And this side I'm going to make red. Not too concerned about the red being over the arms, because the arms themselves are black. There we go. And then this one here, the antennas, I'm just going to make some random color. Let's go ahead and give it, I don't know, that color, something like that. Oh, no, that actually looks like a selected color. So I'm actually going to change that to, oh, fuck it, I'll make it yellow again. So yeah, let's make them all yellow. All right, and there we have it. The rig is complete, ready for production, ready to start animating. And yeah, you can see here that with even no joints at all, no deformers, nothing too fancy, we can still have a pretty robust little rig going on here. Now, of course, it doesn't have any fancy stuff like FK, IK or anything like that, switches or, IK arms, but for a simple animation test and for practice, this is probably as good as you're going to get with a really basic setup like this. And it's also just easy, lightweight. And although there are other ways to link up geometries separately without constraints, this is probably the most fast forward, easy way to go about it. All right, cool. So you can see here, this is the whole point of having a rig setup like this. The idea here of being able to keep the geometry separate from the controls is really important because it keeps things really clean. So if you ever have to make an edit to a mesh, for instance, you won't have to go ahead and unlink everything or do some crazy stuff and break the rig to make it work. All you'll need to do is just update the geometry and then update the constraint. And then you've got yourself a working rig all over again. So that's really, really important when it comes to adaptability in the future when you are animating and you have to do some trial and error. So it's perfect for that. Anyway, in the next video, we're going to actually go through the process of animating this thing. You may notice that the rig looks a little bit different because I had to rebuild this rig because I forgot to record it. But the actual process looks the same. The actual rig setup is exactly the same. It's just that the colors may look a little bit different. But other than that, it's pretty much the same thing. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and you found it useful, feel free to give a like, a subscribe, and hit the bell notification for more. So yeah, look forward to the next video because we're going to make this thing come to life. All right. Until then, catches, have fun, and I'll catch you later. See ya.